All right, folks, so we're sitting here leaning against Suki, Moparbusa's bike, to give you a little more in-depth thought process on the modifications we're making and the reasons we're making them. So he's been riding this thing around. He's got much more comfortable with the power. However, he wasn't actually all the way in the high power. And he was making still upwards of like 350 horsepower, almost 400. But he was on E48. Apparently the E85 there isn't the greatest. At E50 is when the mapping switches to the high boost map. So if he'd gotten 2% more ethanol, he'd gotten the surprise of a lifetime. But here's what we're going and we're doing. So Suki's on the dyno now. We've gone ahead and we removed the Gen 3 cams. It did have stock Gen 3 cams. The intake cam was degreed. I didn't check where it was. Judging by where it swung here, I'm going to say it was set fairly-ish, high-ish. But it's still not a very high lift cam, or not a long duration cam, sorry. And not high lift. So we went ahead and did Gen 2 Hayabusa dual intake cams in this. We didn't want to go with big cams because boost, we'd have had to go with heavier springs to compensate for the added lift on top of the boost we're already pushing. Requires quite a bit of freaking spring. So we went with those. I set them fairly high, so this bike has a major flaw. It seems to be a flaw with the Gen 3 in a turbo format unless you do move the cams. So these bikes make gobs of torque. From the factory, they're torque monsters. They don't make a whole crap load of horsepower. They don't sing a lot of RPM. It's not from the head design. The head design is not very dissimilar from a Gen 2. The piston design is not much different. The combustion chamber is a hair bit smaller. But where it comes from is the cams. And Brock's covered this. A lot of people have covered this now. That these cams are just emissions cams and they're choked up. They give you a bunch of torque to make it fun, but not a whole lot of duration so it doesn't waste fuel would be the easier way to put it. So what we've done is we've taken all that low-end power, and it's probably going to knock it in the dirt. So this thing was making like 340 foot-pounds of torque at 500 horsepower, which was just unbelievable amounts of torque. Made it almost unmanageable to ride because it came in so violently. So we should have, and I'm going to proof it, knocked that down. It'll make like 280 at 500, hopefully, maybe. We'll see. But instead of nosing off at 9,000, 9,500, it should carry out to 11,500, 12,000 RPM, which will be a whole lot better for this application because at its core, this is basically now just a Gen 2 Hayabusa turbo motor, 9-to-1 with frickin' Gen 2 dual intake cams. So that was the whole principle behind that. The other thing we're changing is gearing. So he can't utilize the power he's got. It just spins. At the power level he was at, which is mid-300s, high 300s, he was just spinning. So, two major changes to help with that. One, he's got 1843 gearing on here, which is a little more than stock, but not much. Okay? Actually, I think it might be stock. I think that's stock. I gotta look. No, it's 1743 stock. It's 1843. We're going up to 1938. So way overdriven. This should help with application of the power. You're going to be able to use more power and gain more top end. Because this bike topped out before at like probably 215, 220 is everything she had. She was screaming bloody murder. Now I want it to top out at like 255, 260. Because in 9/10 of a mile, roll racing on an airstrip in Mexico, this thing is going to use that gear. So that's the whole point behind it. The second part of that is I'm going to shorten it. So I'm going to cut some links out, and I'm going to move this forward a hole. Yes, it's going to become wheelie prone. Not a big deal. Better to have wheelies than to spin. Okay? So we can always turn the power down to manage the wheelies and use the wheelie control to our advantage if we have to, if it's too violent. Progression of the boost as it goes through the gears. When it hits a new gear, instead of just jumping, we can progress it up. There's a lot of ways to manage that power. Once you lose traction, it's done. Your chassis is upset. If you tug the tire up a little bit, the chassis tends to stay happy as long as you don't get out of the throttle, and you can use power management to settle it out without completely upsetting the chassis. But once you spin, that shock is extending, everything's coming up, and your run's over. So that's the principle behind what we're doing here. I am currently sitting here on a swig of E50 in this thing, E48, whatever he had in it. I'm going to drain that out, put it back on E85, or in this case, I'm going to put it on C85. Pump E85, C85, there's not a huge difference. There is a couple horsepower difference, I will note that, but we'll put it on C85, and we're going to tune it out just like we would any other max bike, although this one should be really quick because it shouldn't take much but one pass through at a couple throttle positions to smooth it out and figure out where it lost fuel demand in the mid-range and gained a lot up top. So, the biggest thing this thing has as a detriment is it had a little bitty turbo. Itty bitty thing. It's a 52. Little 52. Colt's bike's a 55. John's bike, I believe, is a 60. No, it's a 58. Yeah, it's a 58 Zona. So, these Zonas are really good performing turbos. It's amazing that a 52 millimeter turbo nowadays is able. This bike will probably plant 600 this time. Not gonna lie, it's probably gonna plant 600. It made 557 before. I think with the added RPM, because more RPM, more horsepower, typically, not always, but typically, more RPM while utilizing the power is more horsepower. I think we're gonna do good, but we'll see. Tomorrow, I'm gonna hopefully dyno this girl out and get it done. I'm going to take Chris Charles' bike, which is behind me, for some street riding tomorrow. Burn all the gas in the tank, burn a little more gas, and then I'm going to come back, put it on E85, start right where I just started with the gasoline, except with a lot more boost. But that's what I got. This is the second upload of the day and a longer one, so hope y'all are having a beautiful day.